"You aren't joining the family business expansion," my mother told me, waving a signed contract in my face like a trophy she and my younger sister had just won. "My partners just don't trust you here." Have you ever poured your entire heart into something only to watch the people you love take all the credit? Share your own story in the comments below and subscribe to hear how I handled mine. Because to understand how they eventually lost everything, you have to understand how they pushed me out. It all began in a room that felt entirely stripped of family love.
The mahogany conference table in our family office always felt more like a courtroom than a place for collaboration. Today, it felt like an execution block. I sat at the far end, tracing the condensation on my water glass, while my mother and my younger sister, Clara, whispered furiously near the projector.
I had poured 5 years of my life into Sterling Innovations, taking it from a struggling local distributor to a regional player. I had sacrificed weekends, relationships, and sleep. Yet, as I watched Clara lean in, her hand resting over Mom's, I knew exactly what was happening. Clara had always been the golden child, charismatic, spontaneous, and fiercely protective of her own spotlight. I was the workhorse. Recently, rumors of a massive overseas expansion had dominated our Sunday dinners. It was the natural next step, a project I had essentially drafted the blueprint for. But Clara had swooped in over the last month, charming the new venture capitalists with her flashy presentations and empty promises. Mom, always blinded by Clara's dazzling confidence, was nodding along to whatever poison my sister was currently whispering. The silence in the room was suffocating. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the inevitable blow. I had felt the shift in the wind weeks ago, the sudden exclusion from email chains, the meetings scheduled exactly when they knew I had site visits. I wasn't naive, just deeply tired. Tired of proving my worth to a family that only saw me as a stepping stone. Mom finally cleared her throat and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her pristine blazer. She didn't look me in the eye, and that was the first dagger. The real pain, however, was still to come. Mom walked slowly toward the center of the room, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Clara remained seated, her arms crossed, wearing a faint sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a practiced look, one she used whenever she was about to take something that belonged to me. "Maya," Mom began, her voice unusually soft, laced with a pity that made my stomach churn. "We need to talk about the overseas expansion." I kept my face entirely neutral. "I'm listening, Mom." She sighed, glancing back at Clara for a fraction of a second, seeking permission, or perhaps courage. That tiny gesture broke my heart more than the words that followed. It confirmed who was really running this family now. "Clara and I have been having some extensive discussions with the new investors," Mom continued, her tone shifting into a rehearsed corporate pitch. "They are incredibly excited about the direction we're taking, but they have some concerns about the team structure." I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. I had built the team. I knew every strength, every weakness. "Concerns?" I echoed, keeping my voice steady and professional. Clara leaned forward, taking over with seamless precision. "It's nothing personal, Maya. You've done great work with the domestic logistics, but the international market requires a different kind of finesse, a different energy." I stared at my sister. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She had never managed a supply chain in her life. She wouldn't know a customs declaration if it hit her in the face, but she knew how to play the game, and she had played our mother perfectly. The trap was set, and I was already standing right in the middle of it. Mom picked up a thick, leather-bound folder from the table. She held it with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. "Maya, I'm just going to be direct," Mom said, though her avoiding gaze told a different story. "You aren't joining the family business expansion." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I didn't flinch, even though my chest tightened. Mom finally met my eyes, her expression a mix of defensiveness and misplaced pride. "My partners don't trust you here," she added, her voice gaining a sudden, unearned authority. She waved the folder in the air, the signed contract. She waved it like a prize, a trophy she and Clara had won together. "The venture capitalists feel your approach is too conservative, too rigid."
They want Clara leading this. I looked at the contract, fluttering in her grip. That document represented the culmination of my late nights, my market research, my blood, sweat, and tears, and now it was a weapon used to sever me from my own legacy. Clara offered a soft, patronizing sigh. "We really think you'll be much happier staying here, handling the local warehousing. It's safe, Maya. It's what you're good at. Safe." The word felt like a slap. They weren't just taking my project, they were putting me in a box, locking the lid, and throwing away the key. They wanted me to manage the dusty shelves, while they flew first class on my blueprints. I looked from my mother's triumphant but nervous face to my sister's smug, flawless smile. The betrayal was complete. I should have been crying. I should have been screaming. But instead, a strange, profound calm began to wash over me. A deeply hidden secret was keeping me warm. The silence in the boardroom stretched out, thick with their anticipation. Mom and Clara were waiting for an explosion. They were waiting for me to beg, to argue, to list my accomplishments and demand my rightful place. They wanted the satisfaction of shutting me down, of validating their cruel decision through my desperation. I refused to give them that satisfaction. I slowly folded my hands on the table, taking a long, deliberate breath. The cool air filled my lungs, and with it came the sweet, quiet realization of my own hidden reality. They thought they were taking away my future. They had no idea that my future had already left this building a year ago. "I understand," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any tremor. Mom blinked, her confident posture faltering for a split second. You do?" she asked, clutching the contract a little less tightly. "Yes," I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "If the partners don't trust my vision, then it would be a mistake for me to force my involvement. You need a unified team for the expansion. I won't stand in your way." Clara's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. This wasn't the script she had written in her head. "So, you're just going to step back?" Clara asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I'm going to do exactly what's best for my career," I answered cryptically. I gathered my laptop and my notepad. I didn't look at the contract again. It was just paper, detailing a flawed execution of my brilliant idea. I knew they would fail without me to anchor Clara's wild promises. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My real work was waiting. I walked out of the glass-walled conference room without looking back. The click of my heels echoed through the quiet hallways of Sterling Innovations, a company that suddenly felt like a museum of my past rather than the workshop of my future. As I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage, the heavy doors slid shut, cutting off the world that had just rejected me. Alone in the descending metal box, I finally allowed a small, genuine smile to break across my face. The sting of my mother's betrayal was real. It ached in a hollow place in my chest. But the pain was heavily muted by the sheer irony of the situation. Exactly 12 months ago, anticipating the very glass ceiling Clara and Mom had just installed, I had quietly registered an LLC. I didn't use family money. I didn't use family contacts. I used my savings, a pseudonym for the initial filings, and the sheer grit they had always taken for granted. While they had been busy schmoozing and backstabbing to secure funding for a flawed expansion plan, I had been building Aether logistics. I already had warehouses. I already had international shipping lanes secured.
I had a software platform that made Sterling's legacy system look like an abacus. I reached my car, tossing my laptop bag into the passenger seat. Sitting behind the wheel, I pulled out my phone. There was an email from my actual business partner, a man who trusted my vision implicitly. Final permits cleared. Aether goes live globally at midnight. I replied with 2 words: let's fly. Mom and Clara had their shiny contract. I had an empire waiting in the wings. Let them have the expansion. I had the world.
Looking back, the exhaustion of the past year was a heavy, suffocating blanket I wore every single day. Operating a double life took a profound emotional toll. By day, I was the dutiful, unseen cog in the Sterling Innovations machine. I managed the local warehouses, balanced the domestic ledgers, and nodded politely when Clara interrupted my meetings to boast about her vision. By night, I was the architect of my own escape. My dining room table had disappeared beneath mountains of legal documents, shipping manifests, and market analyses for Aether Logistics. I barely slept. I lived on cold coffee and the burning desire to prove my own worth to myself. There were nights when the loneliness was almost unbearable. I would sit in the dim light of my apartment, scrolling through social media, watching Mom post photos of her and Clara at high society dinners, schmoozing with the investors they would eventually use to push me out. The caption always read something like, "With my superstar daughter, taking the family legacy to new heights." I was never in those pictures. I was never invited to those dinners. I was just the reliable workhorse keeping the engine running while they posed on the hood of the car. It hurt. A deep, persistent ache in my chest that no amount of success could immediately heal. But every time the sting of emotional neglect threatened to break me, I looked at the growth charts for Aether. I wasn't building a company just to spite them. I was building it to survive them. I was building a life where my value wasn't determined by my mother's fluctuating affection or my sister's insatiable need for the spotlight. It only took 3 weeks after my boardroom ousting for the cracks in Clara's grand expansion to show. I was still managing the domestic side of Sterling, quietly wrapping up my loose ends before making my final exit. From my desk, I had a front-row seat to the impending disaster. Clara's strategy, if you could call it that, was entirely built on flashy presentations and unrealistic deadlines. She had promised the venture capitalists that our overseas supply chain would be fully operational in 2 months, a logistical impossibility I had explicitly warned against in my original, rejected blueprints. The family group chat, once a place for Mom to praise Clara's brilliance, slowly shifted into a panic. Clara would text frantically about delayed shipments, held-up customs forms, and furious overseas vendors who weren't getting paid on time. At our Sunday dinners, the tension was palpable. Mom's previously triumphant smile had turned tight and strained, yet her blind spot for Clara remained massive. "It's just teething problems," Mom insisted over roast chicken one evening, glaring at me as if the delayed shipments were somehow my fault. "Clara is doing something revolutionary. Pioneers always face turbulence." "Of course, Mom," I replied softly, focusing on my plate. "If only our domestic team could be a bit more flexible," Clara chimed in, swirling her wineglass with a heavy sigh. "I mean, I'm out there changing the world, and Maya can't even expedite a simple warehouse transfer to support me." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron. They were hemorrhaging money, alienating vendors, and destroying the reputation I had spent 5 years building. But I didn't defend myself. I just let them talk, knowing the foundation was already crumbling beneath their feet. 2 months after the boardroom meeting, I walked into Mom's office and placed a plain white envelope on her desk. She looked up from her computer, adjusting her reading glasses, annoyance already painting her features. "What is this, Maya? I'm incredibly busy trying to fix Clara's shipping manifest," she said, tapping her pen against the mahogany wood. "It's my resignation, Mom." "Effective immediately," I said. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the racing of my heart. Mom froze, the pen slipping from her fingers. She stared at the envelope, then up at me, her expression hardening into a defensive sneer. "Are you serious? You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get the international project?" You're going to abandon your family right when Clara needs local support the most? I'm not throwing a tantrum, I replied evenly. I'm stepping away. I've ensured the local warehouses are fully staffed and the quarterly reports are finished. Clara sauntered into the office, holding a stack of misprinted invoices. She took one look at the envelope and rolled her eyes. Let her go, Mom. If she can't handle the heat of a real corporate environment, we're better off without her. What are you going to do, Maya? Start a little side hustle selling crafts? The condescension in my sister's voice was meant to humiliate me. Instead, it was liberating. Something like that, I said, offering a polite, empty smile. Mom shook her head, her eyes filled with profound disappointment. Don't expect to come crawling back when your little project fails, Maya. We won't have a place for you. I wouldn't dream of it, I whispered. I turned and walked out, leaving the toxic weight of Sterling Innovations behind me forever. The moment I stepped out of the Sterling building for the last time, I didn't feel fear. I felt a massive, exhilarating rush of freedom. I was finally untethered. Over the next 6 months, Aether Logistics didn't just launch, it exploded into the market. Because I had spent a year laying a flawless foundation, we bypassed the painful teething phase that usually crippled new startups. Our proprietary tracking software, the exact software Clara had called unnecessary and boring, became the gold standard in the industry practically overnight. We secured a massive contract with a multinational electronics firm, a client Mom and Clara had desperately tried to woo for Sterling and failed. When I walked into their glass-walled high-rise to sign the paperwork, they didn't treat me like a subordinate or a secondary option. They treated me like an industry visionary. Your efficiency models are breathtaking, Maya, the CEO told me, shaking my hand firmly. You have a gift for seeing the whole board. I drove back to my own office that day with tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of profound, long overdue validation. For years, I had been told my cautious, detailed approach was a weakness. I had been made to feel small, invisible, and easily replaceable. Sitting in my CEO chair, looking out over the bustling floor of Aether Logistics, I finally let go of the need for my family's approval. I had built a multi-million-dollar enterprise from scratch. I was respected, I was successful, and most importantly, I had achieved it all with my integrity intact. I was finally at peace, completely unaware of the massive storm about to hit my phone. Industry gossip is a living, breathing creature, and by the 10th month, it was screaming about Sterling Innovations. You didn't need insider information to see the collapse. You just needed to read the financial papers. Clara's overseas expansion had become a spectacular, unmitigated disaster. The venture capitalists who had been so charmed by her smile were now demanding aggressive audits. It turned out that finesse and energy couldn't clear cargo through customs, and empty promises couldn't pay international tariffs. Sterling's domestic operations, the safe, reliable engine I had built, were being bled dry to cover Clara's international debts. They were liquidating the very warehouses Mom had mockingly told me to manage. I sat in my office at Aether, reviewing a highly profitable quarterly report, when an industry colleague sent me a link to a business news portal. Headline: Sterling Innovations faces imminent bankruptcy as overseas expansion collapses. The article was brutal. It detailed gross mismanagement, breached contracts, and a complete lack of supply chain oversight. The venture capitalists were pulling out, taking whatever assets were left. Sterling wasn't just failing, it was being erased. I stared at the screen, a complex knot of emotions tightening in my chest. A part of me, the inner child who just wanted her mother's love, felt a pang of sorrow for the family legacy turning to dust. But the businesswoman in me, the woman they had cruelly pushed out, felt a cold, quiet sense of justice. Then my phone screen lit up. It buzzed once, then twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. I picked it up. It was a message from Mom. Maya, please pick up. We need you. Before I could even process the words, the phone buzzed again, and the avalanche began. The phone on my desk vibrated with a relentless, frantic rhythm. Bzz, bzz, bzz. It was a physical manifestation of the panic tearing through the Sterling Innovations headquarters. I sat perfectly still, watching the notifications cascade down my screen. 28 text messages in exactly 1 hour. I didn't need to open them to see the progression of my mother's desperation. The first few messages were typed with her usual commanding tone, the one she used when she expected me to instantly fix a minor clerical error. "Maya, call me immediately. We have a situation with the overseas accounts. I need your old spreadsheets." By the 10th message, the authority had crumbled into raw anxiety. "Clara's contractors are walking out. The bank is freezing our operational assets." Then came the final string of texts, the ones that made my breath catch in my throat. "Please, Maya, we are going to lose the house. You are the only one who understands the supply chain. Please help us." A year ago, I would have dropped everything. I would have canceled my meetings, rushed across town, and spent 3 sleepless nights untangling Clara's catastrophic mess just to earn a fleeting nod of approval from Mom. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was the CEO of a thriving enterprise, and my time belonged to a team that actually respected me. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The urge to reply, to dive back into the familiar role of the family savior, tugged at my heartstrings. The emotional conditioning of a lifetime is hard to break, but I took a deep breath, gently locked the screen, and placed the phone face down. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I managed to focus on my afternoon meetings, compartmentalizing the anxiety radiating from my silent phone. But avoiding the digital barrage only delayed the inevitable physical confrontation. At exactly 3 p.m., my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Lin," my assistant David said, his voice unusually strained. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are 2 women in the main lobby causing quite a scene. They claim to be your mother and sister. They're demanding to speak with a manager about a corporate buyout, but they also keep shouting your name." My stomach plummeted. Mom and Clara hadn't just come to beg. They had come to Aether Logistics seeking a corporate bailout, completely unaware that the company they were targeting belonged to me. "Send them up to my office, David," I instructed, my voice betraying none of the absolute turmoil churning inside me. "And please ask security to stand by, just in case." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I needed a moment to ground myself. I had spent years dreaming of the day they would see my success, but now that the moment was here, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt heavy and tragic. The heavy glass doors to my executive suite swung open. I turned around to see Mom and Clara freezing dead in their tracks. The Aether Logistics logo was proudly embossed in silver on the wall behind my heavy oak desk. Mom's eyes darted from the logo to the panoramic view and finally rested on me, standing in the center of the room in my tailored suit. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's mouth hung slightly open, her usually flawless makeup looking suddenly haggard and worn. Mom stepped forward, her hands trembling as she clutched a leather portfolio, likely the very same portfolio that held the disastrous expansion contract she had waved in my face a year ago. "Maya?" Mom whispered, her voice cracking. What are you doing here?" "We came to speak to the CEO of Aether." "You are speaking to her," I replied gently. Mom blinked rapidly, her brain visibly struggling to process the information. "No, that's impossible. Aether is a massive corporation. You run a small side hustle." "I built Aether Logistics, Mom. I registered the LLC a year before I left Sterling. The efficiency models, the supply chain algorithms, the international vendor networks, everything you and Clara rejected. I built it here, and it worked." Clara let out a short, hysterical laugh, sinking into one of the plush visitor chairs without being invited. You're lying. You set us up.
You knew our expansion would fail without your models, and you stole our market share. I didn't steal anything, Clara, I corrected her, keeping my tone perfectly even. I pitched the exact same expansion plan to you both in the Sterling boardroom. You told me my approach was too conservative. You told me your partners didn't trust me. I simply took my rejected ideas and funded them myself.
Mom swayed on her feet, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on her. The daughter she had pushed aside to make room for her golden child was now sitting on top of an empire, while their own legacy was in ashes. "Maya," Mom gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "We need a bailout."
"We are bankrupt, Maya," Mom sobbed, the polished veneer of the formidable Sterling matriarch entirely shattered. "The investors are seizing the local warehouses. They're coming after our personal assets. Clara signed personal guarantees on the overseas shipping lines." I looked at my younger sister. Clara was staring at her lap, tears silently spilling over her cheeks.
The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the sheer terror of a young woman who had played a high-stakes game and lost everything. "I need you to buy out Sterling's debt," Mom pleaded, stepping closer to my desk, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. "Aether has the capital. I read the quarterly reports." "You can absorb our debts, fold Sterling into your operations, and save the family. We are family, Maya." The word family hung in the air, heavy and loaded with years of manipulation. "Family," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "Where was that family when you waved a signed contract in my face and told me I wasn't good enough? Where was that family when I worked 80-hour weeks just to have Clara take the credit? You didn't want me in your family business, Mom. You just wanted my labor." "I made a mistake," Mom cried out, her voice echoing in the large office. "I was blind. I favored Clara, and I was wrong. I am so sorry, Maya. I am begging you on my knees. Please don't let us lose everything." Seeing my mother cry, hearing the apology I had craved for a decade, shattered a wall around my heart. The tears I had held back for a year finally blurred my vision. But empathy could not override reality. I reached for a tissue, dabbing my eyes before looking at the two broken women in my office. The urge to write a check and make their pain disappear was overwhelming, but I knew it would be a fatal mistake. "I forgive you, Mom," I said softly, and I meant it. The heavy resentment I had carried for so long began to lift. "But I will not buy out Sterling's debt." Clara's head snapped up. "Are you punishing us? Is this your twisted revenge?" "It's not revenge, Clara. It's business," I explained gently. "Sterling's debt is toxic. The company's reputation with international vendors is destroyed. If I absorb your liabilities, it puts Aether and all the people I employ here at massive risk. I will not jeopardize my team's livelihood to fix a mess born of arrogance." Mom buried her face in her hands, letting out a gut-wrenching sob. "Then we have nothing. We are ruined." "Sterling is ruined," I corrected her. "You are not." I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out 2 crisp, unlabeled folders. I placed them gently on the edge of the desk. "I won't save Sterling," I continued, my voice firm but compassionate. "But I won't let you starve either. Aether is opening a new regional branch next month. We need entry-level logistics coordinators. The pay is standard, the hours are grueling, and you will report directly to my mid-level managers. No special treatment, no family favors. You will learn the business the hard way, from the ground up, just like I did." Mom and Clara stared at the folders. It wasn't the royal pardon they had come for. It was an invitation to eat humble pie. The 2 manila folders sat on my desk, looking utterly ordinary, yet they contained the heaviest choice my family had ever faced. The silence in the room stretched out, thick with a volatile mix of wounded pride and desperation. Clara was the first to break. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor, her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure indignation.
"You can't be serious, Maya," Clara scoffed, her voice trembling with rage. "I was the vice president of international expansion. I am an executive. You expect me to sit in a cubicle and track shipping containers for some mid-level manager? I would rather starve." "That is entirely your choice, Clara," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart ached at her stubborn blindness. "The offer is on the table. It won't stay there forever." Clara grabbed her designer purse, glaring at me with a resentment so deep it felt palpable. She looked at our mother, expecting her to follow suit and walk out in righteous solidarity. "Come on, Mom, we aren't doing this. We'll find another investor. We'll rebuild." But Mom didn't move. She remained rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the folders. The grand illusion of Clara's competence had finally shattered for her, leaving behind only the cold, harsh reality of their bankruptcy. "Mom?" Clara demanded, her voice pitching higher. Mom slowly reached out, her hand trembling violently. Her manicured fingers brushed the edge of one folder before she pulled it toward her chest, clutching it like a life preserver. She didn't look at Clara. She looked at me, her eyes swimming with a humiliating, crushing acceptance. "Thank you, Maya," Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara let out a sound of absolute disgust, turned on her heel, and stormed out of my office, letting the heavy glass doors slam behind her. After Mom quietly left my office with her folder, the adrenaline that had kept my spine rigidly straight suddenly evaporated. I collapsed back into my leather chair, the immense weight of the afternoon pressing down on my chest. I had won. I had protected my company, validated my worth, and forced them to face the truth. So why did I feel like I was mourning? David, my assistant, tentatively peeked his head through the door. "Miss Lynn, are you all right? Should I cancel your 4 o'clock?" "No, David, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a reassuring smile. "Just need a minute." When the door clicked shut, I turned my chair to face the sprawling city skyline, and the tears finally fell. They were silent, painful tears. Setting boundaries with the people who raised you is a unique kind of agony. I felt like a traitor for not writing the check that would have saved Sterling Innovations, even though my logical brain knew a bailout would have only enabled their toxic dynamic. If I had paid off Clara's debts, nothing would have changed.
Mom would have continued to idolize Clara's flashy incompetence, and I would have remained the reliable wallet, useful but unloved. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I had to let the old version of our family die, so a healthier one could potentially grow from the ashes. I had offered Mom a shovel to help dig herself out, but I couldn't do the digging for her.
The next move was entirely hers. I just prayed she had the strength to actually show up on Monday.
2 weeks later, the liquidation of Sterling Innovations was front-page news in the local business journals. It was a sobering reminder of how fast an empire could crumble. On that same Monday morning, an automated email from my HR department pinged in my inbox. "Onboarding complete, Beatrice Lynn." My mother had actually done it. Around noon, curiosity got the better of me. I left my executive suite and took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, the bustling, noisy heart of Aether's regional logistics division. I stood near the break room, trying to blend in, and scanned the sea of gray cubicles. I spotted her in corner section 3B. Mom was wearing a simple, understated beige blouse, a far cry from her tailored, brightly colored CEO blazers. She was squinting at a dual monitor setup, a pair of reading glasses perched precariously on the bridge of her nose. Her mid-level manager, a sharp 28-year-old woman named Sarah, was pointing at the screen, explaining our proprietary tracking software. Mom looked overwhelmed, her posture stiff, but she was nodding earnestly, frantically taking notes in a small spiral pad. Watching my proud, formidable mother struggle to master basic data entry was a jarring sight. A part of me wanted to rush over, gently push Sarah aside, and do the work for her. The maternal instinct to protect her was profoundly confusing, but I stayed anchored to the floor. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was keeping her head down, swallowing her immense pride, and trying to learn. As I quietly retreated to the elevator, a strange, unfamiliar emotion bloomed in my chest. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a genuine spark of respect for my mother.
A month passed. The novelty of having the former CEO of a rival company working in our data entry pool faded, replaced by the mundane rhythm of corporate life. Mom never tried to visit my office. We didn't speak in the hallways. We maintained a silent, professional distance. However, I kept tabs on her through Sarah's weekly divisional reports.
Beatrice is slow with the software, Sarah noted in week 2, but her attention to detail is exceptional. She caught a massive tariff discrepancy that automated systems missed. One Tuesday evening, I stayed late to review a contract. Walking toward the parking garage, I noticed the lights were still on in the third-floor break room. I peeked inside. Mom was standing by the coffee machine, rubbing her tired eyes, a stack of manifests resting on the counter. She looked exhausted. "Long day?" I asked softly, stepping into the room. Mom jumped slightly, turning around. When she saw it was me, her posture instinctively stiffened before she caught herself and let her shoulders drop. "Oh, hello, Maya. Yes. The European shipping lanes are experiencing weather delays. Sarah asked me to reroute the priority cargo manually." "You don't have to do it all tonight," I offered gently. "The system will automatically flag the critical ones by morning." Mom offered a small, weary smile. "I know, but I want to make sure it's done right. Your clients depend on this efficiency. I understand that now." The words hung between us, bridging the vast chasm that had separated us for years. It wasn't a grand apology or a tearful reunion. It was an acknowledgement of my life's work, spoken from one colleague to another. "Get some rest, Mom," I smiled. "Good night, Maya," she replied. While Mom was slowly rebuilding her dignity in a cubicle, Clara had completely vanished. Her social media accounts, once a daily barrage of luxury restaurants and VIP lounges, had gone entirely dark. I assumed she was couch surfing with her wealthy friends, waiting for another grand opportunity to fall into her lap. I was wrong. My phone buzzed at 11:30 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself. "Maya?" The voice was tiny, fragile, and choked with sobs. It took me a full 3 seconds to recognize it. "Clara, where are you?" "I don't know what to do," she wept, her voice breaking. "My friends, they blocked my number when I asked for a loan. I got evicted from my apartment today. I'm sitting outside a convenience store in the rain, and my card just declined for a cup of coffee. I have nowhere to go." The golden child had finally hit rock bottom. The realization that her charm and confidence were worthless without our family's money had broken her completely. "Send me your location," I said instantly, grabbing my car keys. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to a dingy gas station on the edge of the city. Clara was sitting on the wet curb, her clothes soaked, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She looked up as my headlights hit her, shielding her eyes. I stepped out of the car with an umbrella and walked over to her. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just held the umbrella over her shivering frame. Clara looked up at me, her eyes filled with profound shame. "You were right," she whispered. "I don't know how to do anything." "I know," I said softly, reaching out my hand. "Let's go home." The drive back to my apartment was entirely silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers pushing away the heavy rain. Clara sat huddled in the passenger seat, wrapped in my spare fleece blanket, staring blankly out the window.
The vibrant, arrogant woman who had once confidently orchestrated my downfall was entirely gone, washed away by the harsh reality of her own consequences. When we arrived, I guided her into my guest room. It wasn't a sprawling penthouse suite. It was a modest, functional room with a warm quilt and a small desk.
I handed her a stack of clean, dry clothes, a pair of simple cotton sweatpants, and an oversized university t-shirt. "The shower is down the hall," I said softly, placing a fresh towel on the edge of the bed. "Take your time." Clara stood in the center of the room, clutching the folded clothes to her chest, as if they were a lifeline. She looked around the quiet, safe space I had built for myself without any family money. "Maya," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from crying in the cold. "Why are you doing this? After everything I did, after everything I said to you, why didn't you just leave me there?" I paused at the doorway, looking back at my younger sister. The anger I used to hold against her felt like a distant memory, replaced by a profound, heavy pity. "Because punishment isn't the same as justice, Clara," I answered truthfully. "You've lost your pride, your friends, and your status. That's enough. I'm not going to let you lose your humanity too. Go take a shower. We'll talk tomorrow." I closed the door, hoping the warm water would wash away the last remnants of her toxic ego. The smell of brewing coffee filled my small kitchen the next morning. I sat at the island counter, tapping gently on my tablet, reviewing Aether's overnight logistics reports. I heard the quiet shuffle of footsteps behind me. Clara walked in, looking incredibly small in my oversized clothes. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She didn't look like an aggressive corporate shark. She looked like a lost kid. I pushed a steaming mug of coffee across the counter. "Drink. It's black, just how you used to like it before you started ordering those complicated espresso drinks to impress investors." Clara offered a weak, self-deprecating smile and wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic. She took a slow sip, letting the silence settle between us. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice timid, lacking all of its former demanding edge. "I have no money, Maya. I have nowhere else to go. I can't even afford a bus ticket out of the city." I closed my tablet and gave her my full attention. "The offer I made in my office is still on the table. The entry-level logistics coordinator position, but the conditions haven't changed. You will start at the bottom. You will answer to my shift supervisors, and you will receive absolutely no special treatment." Clara looked down at her coffee. Just a month ago, she had spat at this very offer, claiming she would rather starve than do grunt work. Now, having literally faced the prospect of starving, her perspective had violently shifted. She took a deep breath, looking up to meet my eyes with a newfound, fragile sincerity. "I'll take it. And Maya, thank you." On Monday morning, Clara walked into the Aether Logistics building. She wore a simple, unbranded blouse and sensible flats, her hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. I watched from the mezzanine level as HR escorted her to the customer service floor, 2 levels below Mom's data entry division. I had deliberately assigned Clara to Marcus, my strictest and most demanding mid-level supervisor. Marcus had zero tolerance for excuses, missed deadlines, or corporate jargon. He only cared about results and efficiency. Throughout the week, I quietly checked in on her progress. The transition was brutally hard for her. I watched her struggle to navigate complex freight scheduling software, accidentally disconnecting angry clients, and frantically taking notes while Marcus firmly corrected her mistakes. There was one afternoon where I saw her bolt to the restroom, her face flushed red, clearly holding back tears after a particularly harsh reprimand from a vendor. My older sister instincts flared up, urging me to run down there and comfort her, but I forced my feet to stay planted. If I rescued her now, I would rob her of the resilience she desperately needed to build. She had spent her entire life skipping steps, relying on Mom's blind favoritism to cover her incompetence. This was the first time in Clara's life that she was facing the raw, unfiltered consequences of her own actions. When she emerged from the restroom 10 minutes later, Her eyes were slightly puffy, but her jaw was set. She walked straight back to her cubicle, put on her headset, and logged back into the system. She didn't quit. She didn't complain. She just kept working. That was the moment I knew Clara was finally going to be okay. By her third week, Clara had settled into a grueling but steady rhythm. She was still living in my guest room, but she insisted on doing the laundry and cooking dinner to earn her keep. The shift in her personality was staggering. One afternoon, I was walking past the second-floor break room when I stopped in my tracks. Through the glass wall, I saw Clara struggling with the office copier, a jammed piece of paper refusing to budge. Just then, Mom walked in, holding her empty coffee mug. They hadn't spoken since the day Clara stormed out of my office. Mom froze, staring at her youngest daughter wearing an employee lanyard. Clara turned around, her face instantly dropping into an expression of profound shame. She expected Mom to berate her, to cry, or to turn away in disgust. Instead, Mom slowly walked over to the copier. "You have to press the blue release lever on the side first, honey," Mom said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Otherwise, it tears the paper." Clara blinked, stunned. She reached down, found the blue lever, and pulled. The jammed paper slid out effortlessly. "Thanks, Mom," Clara whispered, looking at the floor. "How is Marcus treating you?" Mom asked, pouring her coffee. "I hear he's a tough supervisor." "He's fair," Clara admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I'm learning a lot. It's hard." Mom reached out and gently squeezed Clara's shoulder. It wasn't the indulgent, blind coddling of the past. It was a gesture of genuine, shared solidarity between two women who were finally learning the value of hard work. I stepped away from the glass, a warm smile spreading across my face, and quietly went back to my office. The end of the month arrived, bringing with it the company-wide payday. It was late Friday evening when I finally locked up my executive suite and headed home. When I opened the door to my apartment, I was greeted by the rich, comforting aroma of garlic and roasting chicken. Clara was standing in the kitchen, wearing an apron over her work clothes, stirring a pot on the stove. On the kitchen island sat 2 large bags of premium groceries. "What's all this?" I asked, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. Clara turned around, a bright, genuine smile lighting up her face. It was the first time I had seen her truly happy in months. "Payday," she announced proudly. "I got my direct deposit this afternoon." I paid my phone bill, set aside a fraction for my debt repayment plan, and used the rest to buy groceries. I'm making dinner tonight. I looked at the bags of food. Clara, who used to drop thousands of dollars on designer shoes without batting an eye, was practically glowing over her ability to buy fresh vegetables with money she had actually earned. "You didn't have to do that, Clara." "You should save your money," I said, though my heart swelled with pride. "I wanted to," she insisted, turning off the stove. "You put a roof over my head when I deserved nothing but the street. It's not much, Maya, but I want to contribute. I want to pull my own weight." We sat down at the small dining table together. There were no expensive wines or fancy centerpieces. Just 2 sisters sharing a simple meal built on honesty and hard-earned respect. It tasted better than any luxury dinner we had ever had. 6 months slipped by, and the seasons changed outside the glass windows of Aether Logistics. Inside, the transformation was even more profound. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the quarterly HR reports, when a specific file caught my eye. It was a promotion request from Sarah, the data entry manager. She was recommending Beatrice Lynn for the position of senior data analyst. I read Sarah's attached note. "Beatrice has been instrumental in revamping our manual routing protocols. She is meticulous, consistently mentors the new hires, and has completely mastered the software. She earned this." I didn't pull any strings. I hadn't even hinted to Sarah that Mom needed a boost. Mom had put her head down, swallowed her immense pride, and done the grueling work to earn her supervisor's respect. I signed the approval form, a deep sense of peace washing over me. Later that afternoon, I saw Mom in the hallway. She was holding her new name badge, tracing the words Senior Analyst with her thumb. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes crinkled in a warm, genuine smile. "Congratulations, Mom," I said, stopping to face her. "Sarah tells me you're the best on her floor." Mom blushed slightly, an expression I had never seen on the formidable matriarch of Sterling Innovations. "Thank you, Maya. It feels different, earning something for myself rather than just demanding it." "It suits you," I replied honestly. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But the toxic, fragile dynamic that used to define our relationship was completely gone. In its place was a sturdy, quiet, mutual respect, built brick by brick on a foundation of reality. The new tradition in our family was Sunday dinner at my apartment. It was nothing like the lavish, catered affairs of our past. It was usually spaghetti, a cheap salad, and whoever was available to help chop the vegetables. That evening, after Clara had washed the dishes and retreated to the guest room to study for a supply chain certification, Mom and I sat on the balcony with cups of tea. The city lights twinkled below us, casting a soft glow on Mom's face. "I owe you an apology, Maya," Mom said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. I looked over at her. "You don't owe me anything, Mom. We've moved past it." "No, I do," she insisted, turning to face me fully. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I spent your entire life taking you for granted. I treated your reliability as a given, and I punished you for not being as loud or as flashy as your sister. I was so caught up in the image of success that I nearly destroyed the only daughter who actually understood what it took to build it." I felt a lump form in my throat. I had waited a decade to hear those words. "When we lost Sterling, I thought my life was over," Mom continued, her voice trembling. "But you didn't give me charity. You gave me a mirror. You forced me to see who I really was, and then you gave me the tools to become someone better. I am so deeply sorry for how I treated you in that boardroom, and I am so incredibly proud of the woman you are." I reached out and took her hand. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by my mother. A few weeks later, my assistant David buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Lynn, Clara is here. She requested a formal 15-minute meeting." I raised an eyebrow. "Send her in." Clara walked into my office. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or flashing a charming, manipulative smile. She wore a standard business casual outfit, carrying a modest finder. She sat down across from me, strictly professional. "Thank you for your time, Maya," Clara began, opening her binder. "Over the last 8 months on the customer service floor, I've noticed a recurring bottleneck in how we process international returns. It's costing us approximately 12% in lost efficiency." I leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Go on." Clara didn't use buzzwords. She didn't talk about vision or synergy. She pulled out a meticulously researched spreadsheet. She had tracked the data, cross-referenced it with vendor complaints, and drafted a step-by-step optimization plan. It was cautious, it was detailed, it was exactly the kind of work I used to do. "If we implement this local routing patch," Clara explained, pointing to her graph, "we can cut the processing time in half." I have already run the numbers past Marcus, and he agrees it's viable. I looked at my younger sister. The arrogant girl who had crashed a company with empty promises was gone. In her place sat a competent, grounded professional. "It's a solid plan, Clara," I said, closing the binder. "I want you to head up the pilot program for this patch. You'll report directly to the logistics director." Clara's face lit up, but she maintained her professional composure. "Thank you, Maya. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I smiled. The ballroom of the downtown hotel was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. It was the 1-year anniversary of Aether Logistics going global. The room was packed with my employees, international vendors, and the industry leaders who had once looked down on me. I stood near the edge of the stage, watching the crowd. I wore a simple, elegant dress, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The company was thriving, our profits were breaking records, and my vision had entirely reshaped the industry. But as I scanned the room, my eyes didn't linger on the wealthy investors or the prominent politicians. My gaze found a small table near the back. Mom and Clara were sitting there, laughing together over a plate of appetizers. They weren't sitting at the VIP table. They hadn't demanded to be recognized as the CEO's family. They were there as proud employees, celebrating the success of a company they had worked hard to support from the ground up. When it was time for my speech, I walked up to the microphone. I thanked my partners, my incredible staff, and the clients who had trusted us. Then, I looked directly at the back table. True success, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom, isn't about never falling down. It's about having the humility to learn from the fall and the resilience to rebuild yourself, piece by piece. I am surrounded by people who embody that resilience tonight. Mom raised her water glass toward me, her eyes shining with pride. Clara beamed, clapping enthusiastically. There were no cameras on them, no high society photo ops, just pure, unadulterated family support. Later that night, long after the ballroom had emptied and the lights were dimmed, I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment. The rain had cleared, leaving a crisp, cool breeze that swept over the glowing city. I thought back to that fateful day in the Sterling boardroom. I remembered the agonizing sting of betrayal when Mom waved that signed contract in my face, telling me I wasn't trusted, telling me I wasn't enough. It felt like a lifetime ago. If I had fought them for control of Sterling, we all would have drowned in the wreckage of their egos. If I had bailed them out when they hit rock bottom, they would have never learned how to swim. Sometimes the most profound act of love is allowing the people you care about to face the consequences of their actions. I had to let our family shatter so it could be put back together properly. Clara was moving out next week into her own small, affordable apartment that she paid for with her own money. Mom was retiring in a few years, proud of the honest work she had done as a senior analyst. And I was no longer the invisible workhorse desperate for affection. I took a deep breath of the night air, letting it fill my lungs. Ether Logistics was a monumental achievement, a multi-million-dollar empire that bore my name. But looking out over the city, I knew the truth. The company was just logistics. The real empire I had built was a family rooted in honesty, boundaries, and unconditional respect. And that was a legacy no one could ever take away from me.